Captain Sarah Chun stood at the edge of the combat arena, watching as the Zephyrian warriors demonstrated their strength to the assembled Galactic Council. The massive, crystalline beings moved like living mountains, their translucent blue bodies gleaming under the artificial suns of the space station. Each punch they threw created sonic booms that rattled the reinforced viewing platforms. "Pathetic," growled Commander Vextar, the lead Zephyrian representative. His voice rumbled through the translator like grinding stone. "These humans claim to be warriors, yet they send us this small female as their champion." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened slightly. At 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighing barely 140 pounds, she looked like a child next to the 12-foot-tall alien warriors surrounding her. Her simple black training suit seemed laughably inadequate compared to their gleaming battle armor that could deflect plasma bolts. The Galactic Combat Assessment was supposed to be a peaceful way to determine which species would be granted full military partnership status in the Alliance. Humanity had been petitioning for 3 years to join the elite warrior races, but every application had been rejected. Too small, too weak, too soft, the same criticisms repeated over and over. "Perhaps they sent their offspring by mistake," chuckled Bracknon, a hulking Garellian whose rocky hide could stop bullets. "Should we wait for the real warrior to arrive?" More laughter echoed through the arena. Sarah watched as delegates from dozens of species pointed and whispered. The Serpentine SS Wrath coiled their massive bodies in amusement. The insectoid Clicktar chittered with what their translators rendered as mocking laughter. Even the peaceful Etherians, floating in their energy shells, pulsed with colors that indicated skepticism. Ambassador Harrison, the human diplomatic representative, leaned forward in his seat. His knuckles were white as he gripped the armrest. This was humanity's last chance. If Sarah failed here, humans would be relegated to support roles forever. Cargo haulers, technicians, and administrators while the real warriors protected the galaxy. "The human representative may begin her demonstration," announced Arbiter Quellash, the ancient being who oversaw all combat assessments. Its multiple eye stalks swiveled towards Sarah with what might have been pity. Sarah walked to the center of the arena floor. The surface beneath her feet was made of compressed neutronium, strong enough to withstand the most powerful attacks the galaxy's warriors could unleash. Scorch marks and impact craters from previous demonstrations covered its surface like battle scars. "What weapon do you choose?" asked Vextar, gesturing toward the massive armory that lined one wall of the arena. Energy cannons capable of leveling buildings stood next to molecular disruptors and gravity hammers that could crush tanks. "None," Sarah replied simply. The arena fell silent. Even the constant hum of the station's engines seemed to pause. "None." Bracknon's voice carried disbelief. "You intend to fight with no weapons?" "I don't need weapons for this demonstration," Sarah said, beginning to stretch her arms and shoulders with fluid, practiced movements. The laughter that followed was deafening. Delegates slapped their seats, appendages, and each other in amusement. The Clicktar's chittering reached a frenzied pitch. Even some of the more dignified species couldn't contain their mirth. "This is better entertainment than I expected," wheezed Gorthe, a massive bear-like creature whose species was known for wrestling supernovas. "The human thinks her tiny fists can impress us." Sarah ignored them all, continuing her warm-up routine. She had trained for this moment her entire life, following disciplines that most aliens had never even heard of. While they built bigger weapons and stronger armor, humans had taken a different path, one that focused on precision, technique, and the devastating power that could be generated by the perfect application of physics. "Very well," Vextar rumbled, his amusement clear. "If the human wishes to embarrass her species, we shall not stop her. I volunteer to receive her attack." The Zephyrian commander stepped forward, his crystalline armor catching the light like a prism. Each plate was 3 inches thick and could withstand direct hits from fusion cannons. The metal underneath was forged from star-core materials, dense enough to deflect meteor impacts. "Strike wherever you wish, little human," Vextar said, spreading his arms wide. "I promise not to move." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Sarah could see the pity in Ambassador Harrison's eyes, the resignation in his posture. He thought she had already lost. But Sarah knew something the aliens didn't. She had studied their anatomy, their armor, their fighting styles for months. More importantly, she understood something about physics that their overwhelming strength had made them forget. Sometimes the smallest force, applied in exactly the right way, could accomplish what brute power could not. She approached Vextar slowly, her hands loose at her sides. The alien towered over her, his chest plate alone bigger than her entire torso. Up close, she could see the microcrystalline structure of his armor, the way the interlocking plates distributed force across the entire surface. "Are you certain you wish to proceed?" Vextar asked, his tone almost gentle now. "I would not want to see you injure yourself on my armor." Sarah looked up at his face, studying the confident expression behind his transparent faceplate. "I appreciate your concern," she said quietly, "but I'll be fine." She took a deep breath and centered herself, feeling the familiar calm that came with absolute focus. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, words spoken during countless hours of training in the family dojo. "Power without precision is just noise, Sarah. But precision without understanding is useless. You must know your target better than it knows itself." The arena held its breath as Sarah raised her right hand. Her movement was so gentle it looked almost like a caress. She placed her palm flat against Vextar's chest plate, her fingers spread wide. "That's it," Bracknon called out. "That's the human's mighty attack." Sarah ignored him, her entire world narrowing to the point of contact between her hand and the alien's armor. She could feel the vibrations running through the crystalline structure, the resonant frequency that held the molecular bonds together. Every material had such a frequency. Find it, and even the strongest substance could be shattered with the right touch. Her grandmother had been the first human to master this technique, learned from studying the way earthquakes could topple buildings while leaving others untouched. It had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with understanding. Sarah began to push, not with her muscles, but with her entire body, channeling force up from the ground through her legs, her core, her shoulder, and finally into her palm. But more than that, she began to vibrate her hand at a very specific frequency, one she had calculated based on spectral analysis of Zephyrian armor samples. For a moment, nothing happened. The aliens began to laugh again, thinking the demonstration was over. Then Vextar's eyes widened. Sarah could feel it starting, tiny stress fractures spreading through the crystalline matrix of his chest plate. The vibrations were disrupting the molecular bonds that held the material together, turning the armor's own strength against itself. "What?" Vextar began, but his words were cut short as a hairline crack appeared across his chest plate. The crack spread with frightening speed, following the resonant waves that Sarah's touch had set in motion. Within seconds, it had spread across the entire front of his armor like a spider web. The arena fell completely silent. Sarah stepped back, her hands still tingling from the transferred energy. "You might want to take a step back," she suggested gently. Vextar looked down at his chest in disbelief. The crack lines were glowing now, stress points failing throughout the armor structure. He took one stumbling step backward. The armor exploded, not with fire or force, but with the quiet violence of complete structural failure. The chest plate simply fell apart, crystals raining to the arena floor like broken glass. The underlying metal, suddenly unsupported, buckled and tore like paper. Vextar stood there in shock, his mighty armor reduced to scrap metal and crystal fragments scattered around his feet. He was completely unharmed. Sarah's technique had been precise enough to destroy the armor without affecting the being inside it. The silence stretched for long moments as hundreds of the galaxy's most powerful beings tried to process what they had just witnessed. A human female had destroyed armor that could withstand starship weapons, and she had done it with what looked like a gentle touch. Ambassador Harrison was the first to find his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Galactic Council," he said, standing slowly. I believe we may have underestimated humanity's potential contributions to the Alliance. But Sarah wasn't paying attention to the diplomats or the stunned aliens. She was watching the other warriors in the arena, seeing the calculating looks that were replacing their earlier amusement. The Gorelians were examining their own rock-hard hides with new concern. The SS Wrath were coiling more tightly, suddenly, aware that their scales might not be the perfect protection they had believed. "Ow!" Vextar whispered, his voice barely audible through the translator. "How did you do that?" Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the arena. "Would you like me to show you?" The Zephyrian commander nodded slowly, pieces of his destroyed armor still clinging to his shoulders. "It's called resonant frequency disruption," Sarah explained, her voice carrying clearly through the silent arena. "Every material has a specific vibration that can cause its molecular bonds to fail. Most species try to overcome armor with brute force, but humans learn to work with physics instead of against it." She gestured toward the scattered remains of the armor. "Your armor was incredibly strong, but that strength came from its rigid crystalline structure. Once I found the right frequency, that structure became a weakness instead of strength." "But how did you know the frequency?" asked Bracknon, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. "Study," Sarah replied simply. "Humans are very good at studying things. We've been analyzing samples of every known armor type for years, looking for weaknesses that brute force couldn't exploit." Arbiter Quelash's eye stalks swiveled toward the human delegation. "Are you saying that humans have developed techniques to defeat the defenses of every Alliance species?" Ambassador Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. "We prefer to think of it as understanding our potential allies well enough to protect them more effectively." The arena erupted into nervous chatter as the implications sank in. If humans could defeat any armor with a touch, what did that mean for galactic security? What other techniques had they developed while the galaxy dismissed them as weaklings? Sarah looked around at the assembled delegates, seeing fear beginning to replace their earlier amusement. This wasn't what she had intended. The demonstration was supposed to show human capability, not human threat potential. "I want to be clear about something," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "This technique requires extensive preparation and study. I can't just touch any armor and destroy it. I had to spend months learning about Zephyrian metallurgy and crystal formation patterns." This seemed to calm some of the delegates, but Sarah could see that others were still calculating the implications. How long would it take humans to study their armor? What other seemingly impossible techniques might they possess? General Koreth, the head of Alliance military operations, stood from his position in the VIP section. The old Drigmarian's scaled hide bore scars from 100 battles, and his reputation for tactical brilliance was legendary throughout the galaxy. "Captain Shun," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets, "would you be willing to demonstrate other human combat techniques?" Sarah glanced toward Ambassador Harrison, who nodded slightly. This was what they had come for, a chance to show what humans could contribute to the Alliance military. "Of course, General," she replied. "What would you like to see?" Koreth gestured toward a massive steel beam that had been placed in the arena for strength demonstrations. It was 3 feet thick and made from military-grade alloys designed to withstand ship-to-ship combat. "Our strongest warriors have tried to damage that beam," he said. "The best result was a small dent from Commander Bracknon's maximum effort. Can human techniques affect such materials?" Sarah walked over to the beam, running her hands along its surface. The metal was cold and smooth, engineered to distribute impact force across its entire structure. Traditional attacks would indeed be nearly useless against it. But Sarah wasn't thinking about traditional attacks. "This will require a different approach," she said, beginning to move around the beam in a slow circle. "May I have some room to work?" The other warriors stepped back, giving her space. Sarah began to breathe deeply, settling into a stance that looked almost like a dance position. Her movements became fluid and precise as she started what looked like an elaborate martial arts form. The aliens watched in confusion as she seemed to fight invisible opponents around the beam. Her hands moved in complex patterns, sometimes striking the air, sometimes pressing against the metal surface for just a moment before moving on. "What is she doing?" whispered one of the Etherian observers. "Building harmonic resonance," Ambassador Harrison replied, though he looked as puzzled as everyone else. Sarah's movements were hypnotic, each gesture flowing into the next with mathematical precision. She was mapping the beam structure with her hands, feeling for stress points and weak areas that weren't visible to the eye. More than that, she was building up energy in her own body, preparing for a technique that would require perfect timing and absolute control. After several minutes of this strange dance, she stopped directly in front of the beam. Her breathing was deep and controlled, her entire body aligned and ready. "Step back," she said quietly, and something in her tone made even the bravest warriors comply. Sarah raised both hands and placed them flat against the beam's surface. Then she began to push, not with sudden force, but with a gradual buildup of pressure that seemed to come from her entire body. The beam began to vibrate. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a faint tremor in the massive structure. But the vibration grew stronger, and the aliens could hear a low humming sound that seemed to come from the metal itself. Sarah's face was a mask of concentration, sweat beading on her forehead as she maintained the precise pressure and frequency needed to build the resonance. This was far more difficult than the armor demonstration. The beam was designed to resist exactly this kind of attack. But humans have been working with metallurgy for thousands of years, and they understood something about metal fatigue that even the galaxy's most advanced engineers had overlooked. The humming grew louder, and hairline cracks began to appear along the beam's surface. Not random cracks, but precise lines that followed the grain structure of the metal like a roadmap. "Impossible," breathed General Koreth. The cracks spread faster now, following the paths that Sarah's movements had mapped out earlier. She was literally conducting the beam's destruction like a symphony, each crack hitting exactly the right note to weaken the overall structure. With a sound like thunder, the massive beam split cleanly in half. Sarah stepped back, breathing heavily but smiling. The two halves of the beam lay on the arena floor, their cut surfaces so smooth they looked like they had been sliced by a molecular blade. The arena exploded into chaos. Delegates leaped to their feet, shouting questions and demand for explanations. The warrior species that had built their reputations on brute strength stared at the destroyed beam in disbelief. How could a species that looked so weak possess such devastating techniques? But in the midst of all the noise and confusion, Sarah noticed something else. General Koreth wasn't shouting or demanding explanations. Instead, he was studying her with the calculating gaze of a military strategist who had just seen a new weapon demonstrated. And she realized that the real test was just beginning. General Koreth raised his hand, and the chaos in the arena gradually subsided. His battle-scarred face remained impassive as he studied the remains of the beam, but Sarah could see the wheels turning behind his tactical mind. "Captain Shun," he said finally, his voice carrying across the silent arena, "you have demonstrated techniques that challenge our understanding of combat effectiveness. However, I must ask a direct question." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the assembled delegates. "Are these party tricks, or can humans actually fight?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt the mood in the arena shift as hundreds of alien beings waited for her response. This was the moment Ambassador Harrison had warned her about, when raw demonstration would give way to practical military assessment. "With respect, General," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the pressure. "What you've seen aren't tricks. They're applications of principles that humans have developed over millennia of warfare." "Principles?" Commander Vextar stepped forward, still brushing crystal fragments from his shoulders. "You speak of principles while the galaxy faces real threats. The void spawn consume entire systems. The hive mind converts civilizations into slave armies. Can your gentle touches stop such enemies? Sarah looked around the arena, reading the expressions of doubt and skepticism that had returned to many faces. The initial shock of her demonstrations was wearing off, replaced by practical military concerns. "May I tell you about the Battle of Kepler Station?" she asked. General Koreth's eyes narrowed slightly. The Kepler disaster? That was 40 years ago. A human mining station was overrun by void spawn scouts. All hands lost within hours. That's what the official report said. Ambassador Harrison interjected, standing from his seat. But the full story was classified at humanity's request. A murmur of confusion rippled through the delegates. The Kepler incident was taught in military academies as an example of what happened when unprepared colonies encountered void spawn forces. Sarah took a deep breath. "My grandfather was stationed at Kepler. Staff Sergeant Shin Wei, Earth Defense Corps. The official reports said the station was overrun, but they didn't mention that a single human squad held the central reactor against 300 void spawn for 18 hours. The arena fell silent. Even the most skeptical delegates leaned forward to hear more. 18 hours? Bracknon's voice carried disbelief. Against 300 void spawn? The records show no survivors. There were no survivors, Sarah confirmed quietly. But they held long enough for the evacuation ships to escape with 8,000 civilians. Void spawn don't take prisoners. They consume everything they encounter. But 12 humans with standard equipment held them back for 18 hours. General Koreth was studying Sarah with increased interest. "How was this relevant to your demonstrations here?" Sarah walked to the center of the arena, her movements purposeful and calm. "Because my grandfather's squad didn't win through superior firepower or stronger armor. They won by understanding their enemy better than their enemy understood them." She gestured toward the broken beam and scattered armor fragments. "Void spawn are strong, fast, and nearly indestructible. But they're also predictable. They attack in waves. They always target the strongest defenders first, and their carapaces have a specific weakness that most species never discover because they're too busy trying to shoot through them." The SS Wrath delegate uncoiled slightly, his serpentine head tilting with interest. "What weakness?" "Sonic disruption at 47.3 kilohertz, Sarah replied without hesitation. "My grandfather's squad figured it out in the first hour of the siege. They rigged their communications equipment to broadcast at that frequency, and it paralyzed the void spawn within a 50-meter radius. The implications hit the military observers like a physical blow. For decades, the galaxy's greatest warriors had fought void spawn with energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, taking massive casualties in every engagement. If humans had discovered a weakness that could paralyze them, why wasn't this shared?" demanded General Koreth, his voice sharp with anger. "Do you know how many lives could have been saved?" Ambassador Harrison's expression was grim. "Because every time humanity tried to share tactical intelligence, we were dismissed as irrelevant. Our requests for full alliance membership were denied. Our military advisors were excluded from strategic planning sessions. The galaxy made it clear that human input wasn't wanted. So you kept these discoveries to yourselves?" The accusation came from Admiral Fluxera, a crystalline being whose species had lost 3 entire fleets to void spawn attacks. "We kept developing them," Sarah corrected. "For 40 years, human researchers have been studying every enemy the Alliance has faced, looking for weaknesses that conventional tactics couldn't exploit." She began to pace slowly around the arena, her voice carrying clearly to every delegate. "The hive mind's control signals operate on quantum frequencies that can be disrupted with properly tuned EMP bursts. The Shadow Fleet's cloaking technology has a thermal signature that's invisible to most sensors, but perfectly detectable by human infrared technology. The Crimson Plague that's been devastating Outer Rim colonies? It can't survive in environments with specific electromagnetic wavelengths. Each revelation sent shockwaves through different sections of the arena. Species that had lost worlds to these threats stared at the small human woman with a mixture of awe and anger. "You've had solutions this entire time?" The voice belonged to Counselor Thurin, whose homeworld had been consumed by the Crimson Plague just 6 months earlier. Sarah's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "We've had theories and partial solutions, but testing them requires resources and access that we've been denied. Every time we've offered to help, we've been told that humans aren't ready for real warfare." General Koreth was silent for long moments, processing the implications of what he'd heard. Finally, he spoke. "Captain Shun, I'm prepared to authorize a field demonstration. However, it won't be against training equipment or volunteer subjects." The arena tensed as delegates realized what he was suggesting. "Sir," Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew what was coming. 3 days ago, long-range sensors detected a Void Spawn Scout force moving toward the Tertian system. Intelligence estimates place their strength at approximately 50 units. If human techniques are as effective as you claim, this would be an ideal opportunity to prove it. Ambassador Harrison shot to his feet. "General, you're talking about sending a single human against 50 Void Spawn. Even if our techniques work perfectly, that's a suicide mission." "Not a single human," General Koreth replied with a slight smile. "I'm talking about a joint operation. Captain Shun will lead a mixed force of Alliance warriors, demonstrating human tactical approaches in actual combat conditions." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was beyond anything she had prepared for. The demonstrations had been carefully planned, controlled environments where she could showcase specific techniques. Real combat against Void Spawn was an entirely different challenge. "Who would volunteer for such a mission?" she asked. Commander Vextar stepped forward, his destroyed armor clattering to the arena floor. "I will. If human techniques can truly defeat what our strength cannot, I must see it for myself." Bracknon nodded his massive head. "As will I. The Garellians have lost too many warriors to these creatures." One by one, other warriors began to volunteer. The SS Wrath delegate spoke for his species' finest hunters. The insectoid Clicktar offered their swarm tactics specialists. Even the peaceful Etherians volunteered their defensive coordinators. Sarah looked around at the assembled beings, warriors from species that had been fighting the galaxy's greatest threats for centuries. They were offering to put their lives in her hands based on what they'd seen in the last hour. "General," she said carefully, "if I accept this mission, I'll need complete tactical authority. Human techniques work best when they're not compromised by conventional thinking." Koreth's scarred features showed surprise. "You're asking for command of Alliance forces?" "Captain, you're not even an Alliance member." "Which is exactly why this might work," Sarah replied. "Every species in the galaxy has been fighting these enemies the same way for decades. You've been trying to outmuscle them, outgun them, outarmor them, but you've never tried to outthink them." She gestured toward the volunteers who had stepped forward. "These warriors are the galaxy's best, but they've been trained to fight according to Alliance doctrine. If we're going to prove that human approaches work, they need to trust human leadership." The arena buzzed with nervous energy as delegates debated among themselves. Command authority was sacred among warrior species, traditionally earned through combat prowess and battlefield experience. Giving it to a human who had never fought in a real war was unprecedented. But General Koreth was studying Sarah with the same calculating expression he'd worn since she'd destroyed the beam. "What exactly are you proposing?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either secure humanity's place in the Alliance or doom them to permanent second-class status. "Give me 48 hours to train a mixed squad in human tactical approaches. Then let us engage this Void Spawn force under real combat conditions. If we succeed, humanity gets full Alliance membership and military partnership status. If we fail," she left the sentence unfinished, but everyone understood the implications. Ambassador Harrison looked pale. "Sarah, if this goes wrong, it won't just be your life on the line. It could mean the end of humanity's Alliance aspirations." "And if we don't try," Sarah replied quietly, Humanity will spend the next century as the galaxy's janitors while real warriors handle the important work. General Koreth considered for another long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, Captain Shun. You have 48 hours to prepare your squad. But understand this, I'll be monitoring every aspect of the mission. If your techniques fail, if warriors die because of human arrogance, the consequences will be severe. Sarah straightened to attention. Understood, General. We won't fail. As the arena began to empty and delegates filed out in clusters of nervous conversation, Sarah found herself surrounded by the volunteers who had committed to follow her into battle. They were an impressive collection of beings, each one a veteran of countless conflicts, each one capable of single-handedly defeating small armies. And each one was looking at her with a mixture of hope and skepticism, waiting to see if the small human who could destroy armor with a touch could actually lead them to victory against one of the galaxy's most feared enemies. So, Commander Vextar said, his voice carrying a note of dark humor, "Where do we begin?" Sarah looked around at the assembled warriors and smiled with more confidence than she felt. "We begin by forgetting everything you know about fighting. The next 48 hours would determine not just the success of the mission, but the future of humanity's place in the galaxy." Sarah only hoped that the techniques she'd spent her life mastering would prove as effective against real enemies as they had against demonstration targets. Because if they didn't, a lot of good warriors were going to die, and the blood would be on her hands. The training facility aboard Alliance Station Omega hummed with activity as Sarah led her mixed squad through their first lesson in human tactical doctrine. The space was massive, designed to accommodate warriors from dozens of different species, but it had never hosted anything quite like this. Commander Vextar stood in formation next to Bracknon, their size difference almost comical despite both being elite warriors. The Zephyrian's crystalline form caught the artificial lighting, while the Gorelian's rocky hide cast deep shadows across the training mats. Behind them, the Serpentine Hunter coiled restlessly beside Clickare, whose insectoid features remained unreadable behind her multifaceted eyes. "Forget your armor," Sarah said, walking between the warriors with calm authority. "Forget your weapons. Forget everything you've been taught about engaging void spawn." Bracknon's rocky face creased with doubt. "Captain, with respect, armor and weapons are what keep us alive in combat. How can we abandon what has protected us for centuries?" Sarah stopped in front of the massive Gorelian, having to crane her neck to meet his eyes. "Because they haven't been protecting you, have they? Your species has lost 3 colonies to void spawn attacks in the last year alone. How many warriors died wearing the best armor in the galaxy?" The silence that followed was uncomfortable, but necessary. Each warrior in the squad had lost comrades to the galaxy's enemies, despite superior equipment and proven tactics. "The problem," Sarah continued, beginning to pace again, "is that everyone fights the same way. You see the enemy, you point your biggest gun at them, and you pull the trigger. When that doesn't work, you get a bigger gun." She gestured toward the weapons rack that lined one wall of the training facility. Energy cannons capable of vaporizing tanks stood next to molecular disruptors and gravity hammers that could crush starships. Void Spawn have evolved to fight exactly that kind of enemy. Their carapaces are designed to absorb energy weapon fire. Their movement patterns are optimized to avoid projectile weapons. They've been fighting conventional tactics for millennia, and they've gotten very good at winning. Clickaray's translator rendered her chittering as curiosity. "What do you propose instead?" Sarah smiled and walked to a storage locker at the far end of the room. When she returned, she was carrying what looked like a simple metal rod about 3 feet long. "This is called a resonance amplifier," she said, holding up the device. "Human metallurgists developed it based on the principles I demonstrated in the arena." Vextar's remaining armor plates shifted as he leaned forward. "It looks like a glorified tuning fork." "That's exactly what it is," Sarah confirmed. "But this tuning fork can generate specific frequencies that disrupt void spawn nervous systems. When properly applied, it can paralyze them for up to 30 seconds. She activated the device, and a low humming filled the air. The sound was barely audible, but every warrior in the squad felt it in their bones. 30 seconds doesn't seem like much, Sissint observed, his forked tongue tasting the air nervously. It is when you know exactly where to strike, Sarah replied, switching off the amplifier. Void spawn have 7 critical nerve clusters that control their motor functions. Humans have mapped every one of them. She walked to a holographic projector and activated it, filling the center of the training area with a detailed anatomical model of a void spawn warrior. The creature looked exactly as terrifying as the real thing. 12 feet of chitinous armor, razor-sharp claws, and a mouth filled with teeth designed to tear through starship hull plating. For the last 40 years, human researchers have been studying every engagement recording, every battlefield report, every piece of recovered enemy tissue they could get their hands on, Sarah explained, highlighting different areas of the hologram. We've learned things about void spawn biology that most species never discover because they're too busy trying to kill them. She pointed to a spot just below the creature's primary sensory cluster. This nerve junction controls their spatial orientation. Damage it, and they can't tell up from down for approximately 15 seconds. The highlight moved to the base of the creature's spine. This cluster manages motor coordination. Disrupt it, and their limbs stop working in sequence. They can still move, but they can't coordinate attacks. More areas lit up as Sarah continued her explanation, each one representing a vulnerability that conventional weapons couldn't exploit, but precise strikes could disable. You're talking about fighting in close combat, Bracknon said, his voice heavy with concern. Void spawn are faster and stronger than any of us. Getting close enough to strike these points would be suicide. It would be, if we fought them one at a time, Sarah agreed. But humans don't believe in fair fights. She activated a new holographic sequence, showing multiple human figures moving in coordinated patterns around a void spawn target. This is called pack tactics. Instead of individual warriors trying to overpower the enemy, we work as a unit to exploit weaknesses. One person distracts, another disables, a third strikes the killing blow. The hologram showed the human figures moving with fluid precision, each attack flowing into the next until the void spawn was completely overwhelmed. It looks like a dance, ClickRA observed. It is a dance, Sarah confirmed. A deadly one. Each movement is choreographed to work with every other movement. No wasted motion, no redundant attacks, no heroes trying to win glory. She looked around at the assembled warriors. That's going to be the hardest part for all of you. You're used to being the strongest, the fastest, the most dangerous warrior on the battlefield. But human tactics require you to trust your teammates completely. Vextar crossed his arms, what remained of his armor creaking with emotion. How do we know these tactics actually work? Have humans ever used them in real combat? Sarah's expression grew serious. 3 times. The Battle of Kepler Station, which I mentioned earlier. The evacuation of New Geneva, where a human squad held off hive mind forces for 6 hours while civilians escaped. And the defense of Outpost 7, where 12 human Marines stopped a Shadow Fleet raiding party that had already destroyed 2 Alliance frigates. She paused, letting the weight of those victories sink in. In each case, humans were outnumbered by at least 10-1. In each case, we took 0 casualties while eliminating every enemy unit. The squad exchanged glances, processing this information. Those battles were legendary among Alliance forces, but the official reports had credited luck and enemy tactical errors for the human victories. Why haven't these techniques been shared before now? SS Inth asked. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. Because every time humans tried to share tactical intelligence, we were dismissed as irrelevant. The galaxy decided we weren't warrior material, so our input wasn't valued. Ambassador Harrison's voice echoed from the observation deck above the training area. That changes today, regardless of how this mission goes. The Alliance owes humanity better than it's received. Sarah nodded acknowledgement to her ambassador, then turned back to the squad. But Right now, the only thing that matters is making sure you understand these techniques well enough to use them effectively. She walked to the center of the training area and began demonstrating the basic movements of human pack tactics. Her motions were fluid and precise, each one designed to position her teammates for maximum effectiveness while minimizing her own exposure to enemy fire. The key is predictability, she explained as she moved. Not your movements, but the enemies. Void Spawn have been winning for so long that they've become overconfident. They expect us to attack the same way everyone else does. She gestured for Vextar to join her in the center of the training area. They expect the biggest, strongest warrior to lead the charge. When Commander Vextar comes at them, they'll focus their attention on him because he looks like the primary threat. Vextar assumed an aggressive stance, his crystalline features reflecting the training area's lights. But they'll be wrong, Sarah continued, beginning to move around the Zephyrian in a complex pattern. While they're tracking the obvious threat, 3 other squad members will be positioning themselves at their most vulnerable points. Bracknon and Assissinth joined the demonstration, following Sarah's lead as they moved into flanking positions around an imaginary enemy. When the attack comes, it won't be a frontal assault, Sarah explained, her voice calm despite the complexity of the movements. It'll be 4 simultaneous strikes at 4 different nerve clusters, delivered so quickly that the Void Spawn won't have time to react. The demonstration continued for the next several hours, with each warrior taking turns in different roles. Sarah was impressed by how quickly they adapted to the new tactics. Despite their different biologies and fighting traditions, they all shared the situational awareness and combat instincts that marked elite warriors. But as the training session progressed, she could see doubt creeping into their expressions. The techniques were sound, but they required a level of coordination that could only come from months or years of practice together. Captain, Bracknon said during a brief rest period, these tactics are impressive, but we've had less than a day to practice them. How can we hope to execute them flawlessly against real enemies? Sarah had been expecting this question, and her answer was ready. Because you won't be executing them flawlessly. Perfect execution takes time to develop, and we don't have time. She activated a new holographic display, showing simplified versions of the movement patterns they'd been practicing. What we're going to do is use degraded tactics. Simpler movements, wider margins for error, backup plans for when things go wrong. The new patterns were indeed simpler, but Sarah could see the tactical logic behind them. Even the simplified versions would be devastatingly effective against enemies who weren't prepared for coordinated attacks. Additionally, she continued, we'll be using the resonance amplifiers to even the odds. Void Spawn that are paralyzed or disoriented are much easier targets than fully functional ones. Clickaray's multifaceted eyes reflected her concern. What if the amplifiers don't work as advertised? What if Void Spawn have evolved countermeasures? Sarah's expression grew grim. Then we fall back to conventional tactics and hope for the best. But I don't think that will be necessary. She walked to another storage locker and retrieved a datapad containing classified intelligence reports. Alliance Intelligence has been tracking Void Spawn evolution for the last 50 years. They've developed better armor, faster movement, more efficient feeding mechanisms. But they haven't developed any defenses against sonic attack because no one has ever used sonic weapons against them. The implications were clear. Humanity's weapons would be completely unexpected because no other species had thought to develop them. There's something else, Sarah added, her voice growing quieter. Something that wasn't in my official briefing, but needs to be said. The squad moved closer, sensing that she was about to share something important. This mission isn't just about proving human tactical value. It's about changing how the galaxy thinks about warfare itself. She gestured toward the weapons rack again, with its collection of devastating but conventional armaments. For millennia, every species has been trapped in an escalating arms race. Bigger guns, stronger armor, faster ships. But it's not sustainable. Eventually, someone develops a weapon so powerful that using it would destroy everything we're trying to protect. Her words carried the weight of hard-won wisdom, and the alien warriors listened with growing understanding. Humans offer a different path. Instead of trying to outmuscle our enemies, we outthink them. Instead of building bigger weapons, we find better ways to use the weapons we have. Vextar nodded slowly. You're talking about changing the entire philosophy of galactic warfare. I'm talking about ending the philosophy of galactic warfare, Sarah corrected, replacing it with something more sophisticated. She looked around at each warrior in turn, meeting their eyes with calm confidence. Tomorrow, we're going to face 50 void spawn with tactics they've never encountered before. If we succeed, we won't just be saving the Tertian system. We'll be proving that intelligence can triumph over raw power. The training session continued for another 8 hours, with each warrior drilling the new techniques until they became automatic. By the time they broke for rest, Sarah was cautiously optimistic about their chances. But as she lay in her quarters that night, staring at the star field beyond her viewport, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The tactics were sound, the weapons were tested, the team was as ready as they could be given the time constraints. So why did she feel like they were walking into a trap? The assault shuttle Harmony dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Tertian system with barely a whisper of displaced energy. Sarah watched the tactical displays from the pilot's seat, her enhanced human senses processing information faster than the ship's computers could display it. Contact, reported Lieutenant Zura, the Etherian coordinator whose energy-based physiology made her ideal for sensor operations. 53 void spawn signatures confirmed, moving in standard pack formation toward the 4th planet. Sarah studied the enemy formation with growing concern. The void spawn weren't behaving according to any pattern in the Alliance tactical database. Instead of their usual aggressive advance, they were moving slowly and methodically, almost as if they were being cautious. Something's wrong, she murmured, adjusting the sensor focus to get a better look at the enemy force. Commander Vextar, now wearing lighter combat armor that wouldn't interfere with the sonic weapons, leaned over her shoulder. What do you see? They're not acting like scouts, Sarah replied, highlighting several anomalies in the enemy formation. Scout forces move fast and strike without warning. This group is taking their time, scanning everything. Bracknon's rocky voice rumbled from the weapons station. Perhaps they have learned caution from previous defeats. Sarah shook her head. Void spawn don't learn. They evolve. If they're acting differently, it means something in their basic programming has changed. She pulled up the mission briefing files and cross-referenced them with the current sensor data. What she found made her blood run cold. Lieutenant Zura scanned for secondary energy signatures, anything that doesn't match standard void spawn bio readings. The Etherian's form pulsed with concentration as she refined the sensor sweep. After several tense moments, her colors shifted to indicate alarm. Captain, I'm detecting artificial energy patterns mixed with the biological signatures. It appears the void spawn are carrying some kind of technological enhancement. Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. They're not just scouts. They're a test force equipped with new technology specifically designed to counter Alliance tactics. The implications hit the squad like a physical blow. If the void spawn had developed countermeasures to conventional Alliance warfare, it meant they had been studying their enemies just as intensively as humans had been studying them. Does this change our mission parameters? Asked Sisinth, his serpentine form coiling with nervous energy. Sarah was quiet for several long moments, running calculations in her head. They could abort the mission and return to Alliance space with the intelligence about void spawn technological advancement. It would be the safe choice, the sensible choice. But it would also mean that humanity's chance for Alliance membership would disappear forever. No, she said finally, it doesn't change anything. If anything, it makes our success more important. She turned to address the entire squad. If the void spawn are adapting their technology to counter Alliance tactics, then conventional forces are going to face even higher casualties in future encounters. That makes proving the effectiveness of human approaches absolutely critical. Click arrays chittering translated as skepticism. But if they have new technology, how do we know our sonic weapons will still work? Sarah activated the tactical display, showing the enemy formation in detail. Because they're still using the same biological base. Whatever technology they've added, it's supplementing their natural abilities, not replacing them. She pointed to specific signatures in the sensor data. Their nervous systems are still organic. Their motor control is still based on biological neural networks. The sonic frequencies that disrupt those systems will still work. You hope, Vextar said quietly. I know, Sarah corrected with more confidence than she felt. Because humans have been preparing for this possibility. She walked to the equipment locker and retrieved a device that looked different from the resonance amplifiers they had trained with. This one was larger, more complex, with additional modules that hummed with barely contained energy. Mark 7 Resonance Disruptor, she explained, holding up the device. Designed specifically to work against enhanced targets. It can cycle through multiple frequencies in real time, adapting to whatever countermeasures the enemy might have developed. The squad exchanged glances, processing this new information. Sarah could see the doubt in their expressions, but also a growing respect for the depth of human preparation. How long have humans been developing these weapons? Bracknon asked. 40 years, Sarah replied without hesitation. Ever since Kepler Station, we've been preparing for the day when the galaxy's enemies would adapt to our initial discoveries. She began distributing the enhanced disruptors to each squad member, along with modified tactical displays that would show optimal strike points in real time. The mission plan remains the same, but with updated parameters. We use pack tactics to isolate individual targets, apply sonic disruption to neutralize their enhancements, then strike at biological weak points. Lieutenant Zara's colors shifted to indicate incoming information. Captain, I'm receiving a priority transmission from General Koreth. The main display activated, showing the scarred face of the Alliance's senior military commander. His expression was grim as he studied the tactical situation. Captain Shun, long-range sensors have confirmed what you've discovered. This is not a standard Void Spawn Scout force. Intelligence estimates suggest they're carrying experimental technology that could revolutionize their combat effectiveness. Sarah straightened to attention. Understood, General. Does this change our mission parameters? Koreth was quiet for several moments, weighing his options. Your orders remain the same, but understand that the stakes have changed dramatically. If this technology spreads to the main Void Spawn forces, conventional alliance tactics may become completely ineffective. The weight of that statement settled over the squad like a heavy blanket. They weren't just fighting for humanity's place in the alliance anymore. They were fighting for the galaxy's survival. Sir, Sarah said carefully, request permission to modify our approach based on current intelligence. Granted. What do you have in mind? Sarah looked around at her team, seeing determination replacing the earlier doubt. We're not just going to defeat this force, General. We're going to capture one of their enhanced units intact. The silence that followed was deafening. Even through the communication link, Sarah could sense Koreth's shock at her proposal. Captain, capturing a live Void Spawn has never been accomplished. They fight to the death and self-destruct when mortally wounded. They self-destruct when they think they're going to die, Sarah corrected. But sonic disruption can interfere with that process if applied correctly. We can paralyze their self-destruct mechanisms along with everything else. She activated a holographic display showing the biological pathways that controlled Void Spawn self-destruction protocols. Human researchers have identified the specific neural clusters responsible for triggering their death reflexes. If we can disrupt those clusters while keeping the creature alive, we can capture it intact. Vextar stepped forward, his voice carrying admiration mixed with concern. The tactical value of such intelligence would be immense, but the risks are acceptable, Sarah interrupted. If we succeed, we'll have complete intelligence on their new technology. If we fail, we're no worse off than we would be with the original mission. General Koreth's expression showed he was running calculations in his head. Very well, Captain. You have authorization to attempt capture, but only if it doesn't compromise the primary mission. The Tertian system takes priority over intelligence gathering. Understood, sir. We won't let you down. The transmission ended, leaving the squad alone with the magnitude of their expanded mission. Not only did they need to prove human tactical superiority, they now needed to accomplish something no Alliance force had ever managed. So, as Sessin said, his tone carrying dark humor, we're going to capture one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators while fighting off 50 of its friends. Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar calm that came with impossible odds. That's about the size of it. She activated the ship's navigation system, plotting an intercept course that would bring them into contact with the Void Spawn force in approximately 2 hours. Use that time to familiarize yourselves with the enhanced disruptors, she instructed. Run through the tactical scenarios one more time, and remember, we're not just representing our individual species today. We're proving that cooperation and intelligence can triumph over raw power. As the Harmony adjusted course toward the enemy formation, Sarah found herself thinking about her grandfather's last transmission from Kepler Station. He had faced impossible odds with primitive equipment and outdated tactics, yet he had held the line long enough to save thousands of lives. Today, she would face similar odds with the most advanced equipment human science could provide and tactics developed through decades of careful study. The question was whether it would be enough. Captain, Lieutenant Zara called from the sensor station. The Void Spawn force has changed course. They're heading directly for us. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. How was that possible? We're running silent, and we're still 2 hours out from intercept range. Unknown, but the change in heading is definitive. They know we're here. The implications were terrifying. If the Void Spawn could detect stealth approaches that fooled Alliance sensors, it meant their technological enhancements were even more sophisticated than feared. All stations, prepare for immediate combat, Sarah ordered, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. It looks like they're bringing the fight to us. As the enemy force accelerated toward them, Sarah realized that everything they thought they knew about this mission had just changed. The Void Spawn weren't just carrying new technology. They were using it with a level of tactical sophistication that suggested something far more dangerous than simple evolution. They were learning. The first Void Spawn reached the Harmony 12 minutes later, moving faster than anything in the Alliance database had suggested was possible. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing alarm as the creature's enhanced form blazed across the sensor grid like a falling star. Impossible, breathed Lieutenant Zura, her ethereal form pulsing with disbelief. It's moving at near light velocity in normal space. No biological organism should be able to survive those acceleration forces. Sarah's mind raced as she processed the implications. It's not just biological anymore. Those technological enhancements aren't just weapons. They're complete physiological upgrades. The enemy's signature was almost upon them when Sarah made a decision that would have seemed impossible just minutes earlier. All hands, brace for ramming speed. We're going to meet them head-on. Commander Vextar's crystalline features reflected his shock. Captain, that's suicide. Even with our enhanced shields, a direct collision won't happen, Sarah interrupted, her fingers dancing across the navigation controls with inhuman precision. Because we're not going to hit them. The Harmony accelerated directly toward the incoming Void Spawn, closing the distance at a rate that made the tactical computer scream warnings. Just as the two forces were about to collide, Sarah executed a maneuver that defied every principle of space combat. She stopped. Not gradually. Not with the careful deceleration procedures that prevented gravitational forces from liquefying the crew. She triggered the ship's emergency inertial dampeners and brought them to a complete halt in less than 2 seconds. The Void Spawn, traveling at near light speed, shot past them like a meteor, its trajectory carrying it several thousand kilometers beyond their position before it could begin to decelerate. Now, Sarah commanded, and the squad moved with the precision of a surgical instrument. The Harmony-S cargo bay opened, revealing 5 figures in combat armor that looked almost primitive compared to the technological marvels they faced. But each figure carried equipment that represented 40 years of human innovation, and their movements showed a level of coordination that no other species had ever achieved. They didn't use the ship's transporters or launch tubes. Instead, they simply jumped into space, using personal maneuvering units to position themselves in a complex three-dimensional formation around a returning void spawn. The creature was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. 12 feet of chitinous armor gleamed with technological enhancements that pulsed with alien energy. Its movements were fluid and predatory, every gesture speaking of perfect evolutionary adaptation for killing. But Sarah could see something else as it approached: confusion. The void spawn had expected a conventional engagement, weapons fire, and desperate evasive maneuvers. Instead, it found 5 small figures floating motionless in space, apparently unarmed and unprotected. The creature's enhanced sensors swept over them, trying to identify threats that its programming insisted must be present. Void Spawn had survived for millennia by never underestimating their enemies, but its tactical systems couldn't process opponents who showed no obvious weapons or defensive capabilities. That moment of hesitation was all Sarah needed. Pattern Delta 7, she commanded through the squad's communication link. Full resonance, coordinated strike. The 5 figures moved in perfect synchronization, their personal maneuvering units carrying them through a complex dance that brought each warrior to a specific position around their target. The Void Spawn finally realized it was in danger and began to react, but its enhanced reflexes were still bound by biological limitations. Sarah struck first, her Mark 7 disruptor generating a precisely tuned sonic pulse that hit the creature's primary neural cluster. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Void Spawn's enhanced systems flickered and died as the biological components that controlled them were disrupted. Vextar followed with a strike to the motor coordination cluster, his crystalline armor conducting the sonic frequencies with perfect efficiency. Bracknon's attack targeted the spatial orientation system, while SS-Synth's strike disrupted the creature's threat assessment protocols. ClickRA's final attack was the most crucial, a precisely calibrated pulse that interfered with the Void Spawn's self-destruct mechanisms while leaving its consciousness intact. The creature hung motionless in space, completely paralyzed, but fully aware. Its technological enhancements sparked and failed as the sonic disruption cascaded through its nervous system. Target secured, Sarah reported, her voice calm despite the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. Beginning containment procedures. But even as she spoke, the rest of the Void Spawn force was approaching, and Sarah could see that their earlier success had been noted. The remaining 49 creatures were moving in a completely different pattern, one that showed tactical adaptation in real time. They're learning, Vextar observed, his voice tight with concern. They saw what we did to their advanced scout, and they're adapting their approach. Sarah studied the enemy formation with growing respect and alarm. The Void Spawn weren't just using new technology. They were using it with a level of strategic thinking that suggested genuine intelligence rather than mere predatory instinct. Squad Formation Omega, she commanded. We go to them. The 5 warriors arranged themselves in a pattern that looked chaotic to conventional thinking, but followed principles of human pack tactics refined over decades of study. Instead of meeting the enemy force head-on, they positioned themselves to attack from 5 different vectors simultaneously. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Void Spawn came at them with enhanced speed and coordination, their technological upgrades allowing them to move and strike with efficiency that would have overwhelmed any conventional force. But they were still thinking like Void Spawn, powerful, fast, and deadly, but ultimately predictable. Sarah's squad fought like humans, unpredictable, adaptive, and absolutely ruthless in exploiting every weakness they could find. Bracknon used his massive strength not to overpower enemies, but to position himself as an irresistible target while his teammates struck from unexpected angles. Vextar's crystalline armor became a weapon itself, conducting and amplifying sonic frequencies that turned his entire body into a resonance generator. SS-Nth moved through the battle like liquid death, his serpentine form allowing him to strike from positions that the Void Spawn's enhanced sensors couldn't track. Click-RA used her species' natural swarm instincts to coordinate attacks that hit multiple targets simultaneously. And Sarah orchestrated it all, her human brain processing tactical information faster than any computer and adapting strategies in real time as the battle evolved. One by one, the Void Spawn fell. Not destroyed, but neutralized, their enhanced systems disrupted, and their biological functions paralyzed. Each victory taught the squad more about their enemy's capabilities, and each lesson made the next engagement more efficient. But as the battle progressed, Sarah began to notice something troubling. The Void Spawn weren't just learning, they were communicating their discoveries to something else. Lieutenant Zara, she called through the communication link, scanned for long-range transmissions from the enemy force. The Etherian's response came back immediately. Confirmed, Captain. High-intensity data bursts being transmitted beyond our sensor range. The Void Spawn are reporting everything they learned to an unknown recipient. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. If the Void Spawn were transmitting tactical intelligence about human combat techniques to their main forces, then their victory here would become a catastrophic defeat for the galaxy. New priority, she announced to the squad. We need to stop those transmissions immediately. But even as she spoke, Sarah realized they were facing an impossible choice. They could continue neutralizing the remaining Void Spawn, proving human tactical superiority, but allowing critical intelligence to reach enemy forces. Or they could focus on stopping the transmissions, but risk letting some of the enhanced creatures escape to threaten the Tertian system. Captain, Vextar called out, his voice strained from the extended combat. I'm reading massive energy buildup from the remaining targets. They're preparing some kind of coordinated attack. Sarah's tactical analysis confirmed her worst fears. The surviving Void Spawn had learned enough about human tactics to develop countermeasures. They were positioning themselves for a simultaneous strike that would overwhelm the squad's coordination abilities. It was time for the tactic that Sarah had hoped she wouldn't need to use. Squad Formation Alpha, she commanded. Personal Sacrifice Protocol. The silence that followed was profound, even in the middle of a space battle. Personal Sacrifice Protocol was the most dangerous technique in human tactical doctrine, designed for situations where conventional victory was impossible. Captain, Bracknon's voice carried deep respect mixed with concern. Are you certain? Sarah looked around at the warriors who had trusted her leadership, beings who had risked everything to prove that intelligence could triumph over raw power. They deserved better than a Pyrrhic victory. Negative, she said finally. Belay that order. We're going to try something else. Instead of sacrificing themselves to stop the transmissions, Sarah began implementing a strategy that no other species had ever attempted. She was going to turn the Void Spawn's own learning ability against them. All units, switch to Disruption Pattern Gamma 7. We're going to teach them the wrong lessons. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah's squad fought with deliberate flaws in their tactics, making mistakes that were subtle enough to seem genuine, but significant enough to teach the Void Spawn incorrect countermeasures. They allowed certain attacks to succeed while preventing others, creating a false pattern that would lead enemy forces to develop the wrong defensive strategies. By the time the last Void Spawn was neutralized, they had transmitted detailed intelligence about human tactics that was completely and dangerously wrong. Any force that tried to use those countermeasures would be walking into a carefully prepared trap. All targets secured, Sarah reported to the Harmony, her voice hoarse from exertion, but steady with satisfaction. Mission accomplished with full intelligence recovery. As the squad returned to their ship with 49 paralyzed Void Spawn in tow, along with the intact technological samples they represented, Sarah reflected on what they had achieved. They had proven that human tactics could defeat enemies that conventional forces couldn't handle. They had demonstrated the value of intelligence over raw power. Most importantly, they had secured humanity's place in the galactic community as something more than second-class citizens. But perhaps the greatest victory was what they had shown the galaxy about cooperation itself. 5 beings from different species, working together with perfect coordination, had accomplished something that none of their individual species could have managed alone. General Koreth's transmission reached them as they prepared to return to Alliance space. His scarred features showed an expression Sarah had never seen before: genuine respect. Captain Shun, the Alliance Council has reviewed the preliminary mission reports. By unanimous vote, humanity has been granted full military partnership status, effective immediately. He paused, studying her image on the communication screen. More than that, the Council has requested that you establish a new tactical training program for all Alliance forces. It seems the galaxy has much to learn from human approaches to warfare. Sarah smiled, feeling the weight of 40 years of human struggle finally lifting from her shoulders. It would be our honor, General. But I think you'll find that humans have as much to learn from our allies as we have to teach. As the Harmony jumped to hyperspace, carrying its precious cargo of captured enemies and hard-won intelligence, Sarah looked around at her squad. They were no longer just representatives of their individual species. They were the first graduates of a new kind of military training that would reshape how the galaxy defended itself. The age of overwhelming firepower was ending. The age of overwhelming intelligence had begun. And at the center of it all was the lesson that Sarah's grandfather had died to teach: that sometimes the smallest force, applied with perfect precision, could accomplish what the greatest strength could not. The galaxy had laughed at humanity's soft punches. Now, they would learn to respect the devastating power that came from knowing exactly where to strike.